All right, so now we need to start talking about the lines of the hand. And this is a pretty contentious area of hand reading studies because there's so much emphasis put on the lines by certain forms of palmistry and chiromancy that you would think that they are actually the most important things to look at in a hand. And it's my experience that when I'm teaching students, one of the things that they look at straight away when they're looking at the hand is they go straight to the minutiae and the detail of the lines. There's something fascinating about lines. There's something kind of that stimulates our curiosity. And we're drawn to them because they appear to be mysterious in some kind of way and inexplicable. And it's clear that the scientific explanations for the lines of the hands aren't justified. Most scientific and commonly held views are that the lines are formed by the folding action of the hand. But it's quite clear that they're not formed by the folding actions of the hand because there are all sorts of lines that don't align with that. For example, you get vertical lines on the fingers, and there's nobody going to argue that the lines on the fingers are formed by a concertining of the fingers by going inwards from side to side. And it's also obvious that the lines are not necessarily formed by the folding action of the hand because of one very, very important factor, which is that the lines form in the hand, in the womb, before the muscles of the hand are present. In other words, there are no muscles in the hand when the lines form for any movement of the hand to cause the lines. So the lines form between the 8th and 12th week of gestation, the main lines. And the first spontaneous movement of a hand in a fetus is about 22nd, 23rd week, so about 10 weeks later, before the fetus is actually capable of moving the hand to cause folding of the skin. So it's more that the skin folds where the lines already are than that the lines form where the skins fold. So the question then becomes, well, what are the lines and how do they get there? Well, it's an interesting fact that during the 8th to 12th week of gestation, that's exactly when the nervous system is being laid down in the body. So there seems to be a correlation between the formation of the nervous system and the formation of the line formations in the hand, which kind of makes more sense if you think of the brain as an extension of the center of the neurological system and the center of consciousness, and how consciousness and the hand are therefore interrelated. But I think the other more significant thing, which is fairly obvious too, is that the line formations are formed by genetics. And then there's nothing more true to see than that, than in this case of the Simian line, which is found in the hands of people with Down syndrome. I will show an illustration of a Simian line in another talk, but the Simian line normally occurs in about 2% of non-Down syndrome people and occurs in about 55% of people with Down syndrome. So it's incredibly common, not just in Down syndrome, but in other genetic anomalies as well, which is sufficient for scientific researchers to decide that the line is a genetic indicator, an indicator of genetic conditions, genetic malformations, and is widely studied in the dermatoglyphic literature that's been produced in the last 100 years or so. So there's kind of very clear indication from their evidence that the lines are not formed by folding either, they're actually genetic. So there's some genetic, some psychological, some neurological functioning correlations going on there. And I think the answer is nobody really knows how the lines formed. But it is nonetheless true that they are there. And our task as hand readers is to try and make sense of what we see in the hand. Now, that's where the problems come in, because you take a sort of superstitious view of the lines like you find in medieval chiromancy, and they're looking for triangles, and they're looking for crosses. They're looking for things that correlate with symbols with which they're familiar. And in medieval chiromancy, the context of that is the domination of European thinking by the Catholic Church. So a cross was a bad thing because Jesus died on the cross. Therefore, if you find a cross in the hand, that's a sure sign of how you're going to die. And if you see a triangle in the hand, that's the sign of the Holy Trinity. So that's an indication of a good thing and a blessing, because it means God, the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Ghost are with you and are supporting you in your life. So this idea of looking for shapes and images or pictures, and you get that again in Indian palmistry. It's very much like tea leaf reading and sort of seeing shapes in shadows, or the Rorschach blot in ink test. Same kind of idea, and there's psychological significance to be seen in seeing shapes and formations in these accidental configurations that we see in tea leaves or in ink blots or in the lines of the palm. But actually, that actually obscures the fact that the lines of the hand actually do have very distinctive patterns and distinctive formations, which can be considered to be normal and not normal. So let's kind of have a look. We're going to have a look at those and that for now, because that's where you start seeing the lines as they are and not in terms of shapes and patterns. So forget the idea of shapes and patterns. It's really not important. I mean, if you look at my palm, you can see quite clearly I have a massive M in my hand. Everybody has got an M if they have the 4 primary lines of the hand. And this is of absolutely no significance whatsoever. So we're not looking for shapes. We're not looking for patterns. We're looking for the line formations. So if we go to the screen share and look at where the main lines of the hand actually are, I'll do that one first. So here's an abstract which will kind of give you an idea of the locations of the main lines of the hand. And there are 4 main lines of the hand. Everybody has 3 main lines. Some people have the 4th one, which runs up the middle. But the 3 main lines of the hand go round the ball of the thumb. They go from above the thumb across to the underneath the little finger of the hand. And then you also have another one which starts underneath the little finger and goes up to the space between the index finger and the middle finger. So those are the 3 main lines of the hand. Just about everybody has those 3 main lines. And you can actually see them in any kind of handprint you get. You can, hang on, let me just go to the next screen. And I'll stop that share and I'll just start another one. So you can actually see the actual lines themselves. So here's a handprint, which is a relatively clear indication of the 3 main lines. You've got the major earth line. So the major earth line runs around the ball of the thumb. And this is not the lifeline. It's a really, really bad idea to call it the lifeline. It leads you straight into that fallacious argument that people say, oh, if it's a lifeline, that means the longer the line, the longer your life, which is palpably and demonstrably untrue. You might as well call it the Fred line, you know, and say, oh, well, that's your Fred line. So the longer the line, the longer your Fred. Or if you call it the hairline, the longer your line, the longer your hair. It doesn't make any sense. It's just not logical to even think in that kind of way. But it does show something about how the person grounds themselves in the world, how they are rooted in the country or the place in which they live, their relationship to their family, all the things that create stability, structure, and security. The line that traverses the middle of the palm is called the air line. So the air line indicates something to do with our thought processes. This is probably the line that has been most studied scientifically, particularly by Charlotte Wolfe in her work on psychological diagnosis of the residents of mental asylums, where she's basically done the most statistical work that correlate this line with intelligence and intellectual functioning. So this is probably the line that's been most clearly understood and clearly identified. So read her work if you want to get the basis for that. But its form, its shape, and where it ends in the palm is very strongly indicative of how someone thinks and how someone understands the world. The other main line is the water line, which starts underneath the little finger and goes towards the index finger. And the water line, sometimes in palmistry known as the heart line, is indicative of our emotional orientation to life, and therefore says something about our relationships, how we connect with other people. It says something of our emotional and sexual needs, and something of our, in some ways, something to do with the psychology of our ability to connect not only with people but with the divine as well. That's a quite subtle interpretation of the line, but really important one. When you get into it, you'll understand what I'm talking about that. So those three lines are nearly always present in a hand. If someone's got one of those lines missing, there is something seriously problematic in that person's life. But you would expect to see the major earth line curling around the palm there, the major air line going across the palm there, and the major water line going towards the index finger. Now, one of the interesting debates in palmistry is which direction do these lines go in? Well, the answer to that question is easily determined by which end of a line is the most common and which end of the line is most variable. So the major earth line and the major air line always start here, and the major earth line can end anywhere down there. The major air line always starts up here underneath the index finger, but can end anywhere in this area down here. And with the water line, and this is where there's the contention, and it's all, again, a controversy that starts from Benham, who is single-handedly the one who started this whole idea that the water line starts at the water finger and then goes that way. Indicates quite clearly to me that he didn't really look at hands, because the consistency in the water line is it's always present underneath the little finger, and yet the ending of the line is enormously varied. You can end anywhere underneath the earth finger, right across to the edge over there. So let me just show you the abstract that I showed you before, because the purpose of that really is to indicate the sort of variations in the endings, like where those lines typically end. And you can see that by the dotted line formations that I've made there. So the earth line can end anywhere in that part of the palm. The water line can end anywhere in that part of the palm, and the air line can end anywhere in that part of the palm. And as we know from the elements, earth is consistent, air is variable. So where we see consistency, we know we have an earth characteristic. Where we see variability, we know we have an air characteristic. So what we know is that things start from the roots and they diversify as they grow up. So the elements always progress: earth, water, fire, and then air, in that kind of way. So therefore, we know that the consistent end of the line is the earth end of the line, or the beginning of the line, and the variable end of the line is the air end of the line, which is to say the ending of the line. So if you're looking at how a process occurs within consciousness from beginning to completion, that's the way you need to look at the flows of the lines themselves. So I want to show you a couple of other images which will illustrate what I'm talking about here. And probably the first thing to look at really is the Simian line. So let's just go to the Simian line and let me just share that with you. Let's go there. There we go. So a Simian line is quite characteristic when you see it. What you've got there is you've got a fusion of the major water line and the major air line. So instead of there being two lines going across the palm, you've got one line that connects the two together. In this particular example, you can actually see vestiges of a part of the water line up here and a part of the air line down here. So this isn't, if you like, a pure Simian line, but it will function very much in that kind of way. And this is the hand of a normal functioning person with a Simian line. And what you can see in this particular quality is you've got a fusion of the air line and the water line, or if you like, the head line and the heart line. And that gives us the clues to what's actually going on. And again, it's one of the things that shows how hand reading works, because we know, for example, if we take Down syndrome people, we know that they have problems with intellectual functioning, but we also know that they are emotionally very expressive people, very friendly, very sociable, very connecting to other people. And what you see in those cases is you see a domination of the emotion of the heart over intellect, over the head. And so we know that there's an imbalance in those two faculties within people with Down syndrome. And we can therefore infer there's an imbalance in those faculties in people, non-Down syndrome people with Simian lines. So what do we see? Where do we see non-Down syndrome Simian lines more commonly? We see them in the hands of criminals and psychopaths, people who are good at burying their emotions. We get on people who are channel all their energies into the whatever they are obsessed about. They pour their head and heart into one thing. But often they're very good researchers, or they're often very intelligent, or they're often very manipulative. They're very clever and cunning, it's another way of putting it. And they don't suffer the effects of intellectual handicap like people with Down syndrome do. But the advice is always going to be very careful about getting into a relationship with somebody with a Simian line. You're not going to see what's coming at you. And I'll give you another example of that, because it's quite good to see different examples, because they look slightly differently. I'm going to show you this one here. So you can see how well formed that Simian line is in that way. There you go. All right, so one more thing I want to show you about the main lines of the hand, and which is to say how rare it is to find a hand without all three main lines. Well, this is a really good example that I found many years ago. This is the only hand I've ever seen which does not have a headline, does not have an airline. You can see very clearly the earth line going around the palm in this kind of formation here, and you've also got a very strong water line going up here, arguably branching down and going there. And you could, I guess, argue that that's a kind of Simian line, but its form of it is much more of a drooping major water line, and the air line, which should be there, just is not there at all. And what's interesting about this hand is, I wonder if we can do his other hand as well. I'll see if I can find his other hand. There, it's the other way. Okay, cool. Let me just go back to that again. Share screen. It's the other way. It's that way. So both of his hands had this feature. Oh no, you can see there's an airline in that hand. So that's his left hand. But you can see how quite weakly formed the airline is in this hand here. But they are definitely both there in this hand. Not a particularly long major airline, but definitely present. Whereas in this hand, and he was right-handed, the airline is completely missing. And this guy was an absolutely extraordinary character that I met at a festival in the South Island of New Zealand. He was traveling the world, looking at natural energetic sites and clearing the energy of the land. He's got earth hand and earth skin, and a very instinctive relationship with the natural world and the natural environment, and was doing some quite incredible things in that regard. Australian guy with very long dreadlock hair, lived closely with Aboriginal people in Australia for some time, and was imbibing their philosophy. He could paint Aboriginal art, and he could perform their music as well. So he was very much aligned with that. And about a month after I took this photograph of his hands, he actually died in a swimming accident off the coast of New South Wales, swimming in the sea, which was one of his passions. So yeah, so it's incredibly rare to find a hand that does not have all of the three main lines of the hand. And that's kind of what I want to talk all I want to talk today about really is these three main lines of the hand and how they're important they are. So if we go back to the diagram at the beginning again, that's what you need to look for. So don't look for patterns. Look for the location of the three main lines. You've got the major earth line running around the ball of the thumb, major air line going across the hand from the thumb side to the little finger side, and the major water line going from the little finger side to the index finger. So those are the three main lines of the hand. And in every case of the hand, apart from that one example, you will find all three lines, even if as a Simian line, two of those lines are fused together. And if you find a hand which does not have those three main lines, there's something quite seriously different about that person, and it could be incredibly problematic. So that's what you need to look at first. Look for the three main lines. Look for the form of the line, like the shape of it. Is it straight? Is it curved? And look particularly for the beginnings and the endings of the line. And they will tell you a huge amount of information about the person's lifestyle, how they think, and the way in which they relate to other human beings. All right, so we're going to end it there on the main lines, and we'll come back again for a look at the subsidiary lines of the hand. Don't forget to like and subscribe below, and put any comments in there down below as well, and I'll get back to you, and we will find out more about the other lines in due course. So thank you for your time today. Hope you've enjoyed it. Speak again soon.